The sound of boots thundering against linoleum echoed through the hallways of Sunshine Special Needs Daycare as armed officers burst through the front doors, their tactical gear gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Children's screams pierced the air, mingling with the sharp commands of, "Get down, get down," as little bodies in superhero costumes scrambled for cover behind overturned tables and scattered toys. 8-year-old Marcus, dressed as Superman, but confined to his wheelchair, watched in terror as a rifle-wielding officer approached him. His cape, bright red and billowing just moments before during their costume parade, now hung limp around his shoulders as tears streamed down his face. "I didn't do anything wrong," he sobbed, his voice cracking with fear. The officer, badge gleaming with the name HOA, barely glanced at the child before barking into his radio. "Sector clear. Moving to the next room." His voice carried no warmth, no recognition that he was terrorizing innocent children who had been celebrating their favorite heroes just minutes earlier. Sarah Chen, the daycare director, stood frozen in the doorway, her own Wonder Woman costume a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding before her. She had spent months planning this superhero day, designing activities that would make each of her 23 special needs children feel powerful and celebrated. Now, as she watched Officer Hoa roughly push aside a craft table covered in colorful masks and capes, she felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "What is this about?" Sarah demanded, stepping forward with her arms spread protectively. "These are children, special needs children. You're terrifying them." Officer Hoa turned toward her, his face hidden behind dark sunglasses despite being indoors. "We received credible intelligence about a terrorist threat at this location. Everyone needs to evacuate immediately." His tone was mechanical, rehearsed, as if he had practiced these words countless times. The morning had started so differently. At 9 o'clock, parents had dropped off their children with excited kisses and promises to see their superhero performances later that afternoon. The daycare had been transformed into a colorful wonderland of cardboard buildings and streaming banners. Tommy, a 10-year-old with autism, had spent the entire previous evening perfecting his Batman voice. Emma, who had cerebral palsy, had insisted on being Wonder Woman because she wanted to show everyone that girls could be strong too. The children had been in the middle of their costume parade when the first sounds of sirens pierced the morning air. Sarah had initially thought it was just city traffic, but as the wailing grew louder and more persistent, she began to feel a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. By the time she realized the sirens were stopping directly outside their building, it was too late. "Ma'am, I need you to gather all the children in the main room immediately," Officer Hoa commanded, his hand resting on his weapon holster. "No sudden movements, no cell phone calls, just compliance." Sarah's training kicked in as she began herding the frightened children toward the center of the room. Her voice, though shaking, maintained the gentle tone she always used with them. "Okay, everyone, let's all come together like we practiced during our fire drills. Emma, can you help Tommy with his cape, Marcus? You're doing great, buddy." But this was nothing like their fire drills. The children's faces were streaked with tears, their carefully applied superhero makeup now smeared and running. Little Lucy, who had Down syndrome and was dressed as Supergirl, kept asking in her sweet voice, "Are the bad guys here? Are we going to be okay?" Outside, the scene was equally chaotic. Parents who had been arriving for the afternoon performance found themselves blocked by police tape and barricades. The entire block had been cordoned off, with officers in riot gear stationed at every corner. News vans were already pulling up, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. Maria Rodriguez clutched her car keys so tightly they left marks on her palm as she approached the police line. Her daughter, Isabella, who had spina bifida, was inside that building, probably terrified and wondering where her mother was. "Please, I need to get to my daughter," Maria pleaded with the officer blocking her path. "She's only 6 years old. She doesn't understand what's happening." The officer, young and clearly uncomfortable, shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. No one goes in or out until we get the all clear. It's for everyone's safety." His eyes darted toward the building, then back to Maria's desperate face. "I'm sure the children are fine. The officers inside know what they're doing." But inside the building, the officers seemed to know very little about dealing with special needs children. When 9-year-old David, who had ADHD, began having a panic attack and started rocking back and forth, an officer roughly grabbed his shoulders. "Stop that, sit still." The officer's harsh command only made David's condition worse, his rocking becoming more violent as he hyperventilated. "He can't help it," Sarah cried out, pushing past another officer to reach David. "He has ADHD. The rocking is how he self-soothes when he's scared." "You're making it worse." She knelt beside David, her voice dropping to a whisper. "David, sweetie, can you look at me? Can you tell me what color my costume is?" Officer Hoa stepped forward, his presence looming over both Sarah and the frightened child. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. We're conducting a security sweep, and any interference could compromise the operation." His voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. But Sarah had spent her career advocating for these children, and she wasn't about to stop now. "A security sweep of what?" Sarah demanded, rising to her feet. "This is a daycare for disabled children. What possible threat could you be looking for here?" Her voice was rising, and she could feel her professional composure beginning to crack. "These children trust me to keep them safe, and you're traumatizing them." The other officers exchanged glances, some of them clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Officer Johnson, a veteran with 20 years on the force, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He had children of his own, and watching these scared kids was eating at him. "Hua, maybe we should," he began, but was cut off by a sharp look from his superior. "We follow protocol. Johnson, no exceptions." Hoa's voice was steel, final. "The threat assessment indicated possible explosive devices or weapon storage. We search everything." As if on cue, officers began roughly searching through the children's belongings. Backpacks filled with juice boxes and animal crackers were dumped onto the floor. Art supplies were scattered across tables. An officer opened Tommy's Batman lunchbox with such force that his sandwich flew out, landing face down on the floor. Tommy began to cry, not just from fear, but from the loss of the lunch his mother had made with extra love, cutting his sandwich into a bat shape. "My sandwich," Tommy whimpered, his voice muffled by the Batman mask he refused to remove. "Mommy made it special." The officer didn't even acknowledge the child's distress as he continued his search, pulling out Tommy's favorite stuffed animal and examining it as if it might contain dangerous materials. The teddy bear, worn soft from years of love, was handled with the same suspicion as everything else in the room. Outside, the crowd of parents was growing larger and more agitated. James Wilson, whose son Kevin was inside, had been trying to get answers from anyone in authority for over an hour. "My son has autism," he explained to yet another officer. "Loud noises and sudden changes terrify him. He's probably having a complete meltdown in there." The officer, clearly out of his depth, could only repeat the same scripted response. "Sir, we're doing everything we can to ensure the safety of all individuals involved. Please remain behind the barrier." Safety. James's voice cracked with emotion. You want to know about safety? My son's safety is being in a calm, predictable environment with people who understand his needs. This is the opposite of safe for him. A news reporter, sensing the growing tension, approached James with a microphone. Sir, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. Can you tell us what's happening here? James looked directly into the camera, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. What's happening is that armed police officers are terrorizing disabled children who are just trying to have a fun day dressed as superheroes. There's no terrorist threat here. There's no danger. There's just a bunch of scared kids who don't understand why men with guns are treating them like criminals. Inside the building, the situation was deteriorating further. Several children were now in full panic mode, their various conditions making them react differently to the stress. Emma, the little girl with cerebral palsy, was having trouble controlling her movements, her Wonder Woman costume trembling as her muscles tensed. Marcus, still in his wheelchair, was hyperventilating so badly that Sarah was worried he might pass out. Please, Sarah begged Officer Hoa. At least, let me call their parents. These children need their families right now. No outside communication until the sweep is complete. Hoa replied curtly. Those are the rules. Rules. Sarah's voice rose to a shout. These aren't rules. This is cruelty. Look at them. Really look at them. She gestured toward the huddled group of children, most of whom were crying or rocking or staring blankly ahead in shock. Does this look like a terrorist operation to you? For a moment, something flickered in Hoa's expression, but it was quickly replaced by his practiced mask of authority. I don't make the rules, ma'am. I just enforce them. As the search continued, more officers arrived. The building began to feel claustrophobic, filled with the sound of heavy boots and radio chatter. Every few minutes, an officer would report back to Hoa with the same message, nothing found in this sector. But instead of scaling back the operation, Hoa seemed to be doubling down, calling for additional backup and expanding the search area. The children's afternoon snack time came and went without food. Their usual bathroom breaks were denied. When little Isabella, Maria's daughter, wet herself out of fear and confusion, she was made to sit in her soiled clothes while officers continued their search around her. The smell of urine mixed with the scent of cleaning supplies and fear-induced sweat, creating an atmosphere of degradation that was foreign to the usually cheerful daycare. This is insane, whispered Mrs. Patterson, one of the teaching assistants, to another staff member. I've worked with these kids for 5 years. The most dangerous thing in this building is the safety scissors in the art room. Outside, the media presence was growing exponentially. News vans from every major network had arrived, their reporters setting up for live broadcasts. The story was already spreading across social media, with parents and community members sharing videos and photos of the police barricades surrounding the daycare. Dr. Lisa Chen, Sarah's sister and a child psychologist, had rushed to the scene as soon as she heard the news. She stood behind the police line, her professional knowledge making her acutely aware of the psychological damage being inflicted on the children inside. Officer, she called to the nearest policeman. I am a licensed child psychologist. These children are experiencing severe trauma right now. The longer this continues, the more long-term damage you're causing. The officer looked genuinely concerned but shook his head. I understand your concern, doctor, but we have our orders. No civilians allowed inside the perimeter. Orders from whom? Dr. Chen pressed. Who authorized this raid? What evidence justified treating disabled children like enemy combatants? The officer's expression showed he was asking himself the same questions. But he could only shrug. Above my pay grade. Doctor. I just follow instructions. Inside the daycare. The afternoon was wearing on, with no end in sight. The children had missed their lunch, their scheduled therapy sessions, and their medication times. Several of the kids required specific medications at regular intervals, and Sarah was becoming increasingly worried about their physical health in addition to their emotional well-being. Officer HOA. Sarah approached him again, this time with a clipboard in her hand. I need to give these children their medications. Kevin needs his anti-anxiety medication. Marcus needs his heart medication. And Emma needs her muscle relaxant. This isn't optional. It's medically necessary. HOA glanced at the clipboard, his expression unreadable. All medications need to be tested for contamination before administration. That will take approximately 2 hours. 2 hours. Sarah's voice was incredulous. These are prescription medications from licensed pharmacies. Kevin is already showing signs of severe anxiety without his medication. You're putting these children's lives at risk. I'm following standard protocol for potential contamination scenarios, HOA replied, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. For the first time, he seemed to realize the full implications of what he was orchestrating. It was then that Officer Johnson, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, made a decision that would change everything. During a brief moment when HOA was occupied with radio communications, Johnson approached Sarah. Ma'am, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't seen in any of the other officers' genuine concern and doubt. What is it? Has there been anything unusual happening around here lately? Any threats? Any suspicious activity? Anything that might have triggered this kind of response? Sarah thought carefully before responding. The only unusual thing that's happened recently is that we've been dealing with some issues about our security contract. The city has been pressuring us to hire a specific security company, even though we've never needed security before. Johnson's eyes narrowed. What kind of security company? Something called Secure Solutions, Inc. They kept saying that facilities like ours were vulnerable to terrorist attacks and that we needed their services. We kept refusing because it seemed ridiculous. We're a daycare for disabled children. But they kept pushing, saying they had connections with law enforcement and that we might not have a choice. A chill ran down Johnson's spine. Secure Solutions, Inc. was owned by HOA's brother-in-law, and Johnson had heard rumors about the company's aggressive tactics for securing contracts. Ma'am, I need to make a phone call. Can you keep this conversation between us for now? As Johnson stepped away to make his call, the situation inside the daycare continued to deteriorate. Several children were now showing signs of severe dehydration and exhaustion. Little Tommy had stopped responding to questions entirely, retreating into himself in a way that Sarah recognized as a trauma response. Emma's muscle spasms were getting worse without her medication, and Marcus was struggling to breathe properly. This has to stop, Sarah declared, her voice carrying an authority that made even the armed officers pause. I don't care about your protocols or your procedures. These children are in medical distress, and I'm responsible for their welfare. Either you let me get them the help they need, or I'm going to start making some very loud accusations about child abuse. Officer HOA's jaw tightened. Are you threatening a police officer, ma'am? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm stating facts. You are currently preventing medically necessary care for disabled children. That's a crime, Officer HOA, and I'm prepared to file charges. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but at that moment, Officer Johnson returned from his phone call with a grim expression. HOA, I need to speak with you privately. Right now. I'm in the middle of an operation. Johnson, whatever it is can wait. No, it can't wait. I just spoke with Captain Rodriguez. He wants to know why you initiated this raid without proper authorization from the department. For the first time since the raid began, HOA's composure cracked. I have full authorization. The threat assessment came through the proper channels. What threat assessment? Captain Rodriguez says no such assessment was filed with the department. He also says no one authorized a raid on this facility. Johnson's voice was getting louder, and other officers were starting to listen. He wants to know why you're using department resources for an unauthorized operation. The implications of Johnson's words began to sink in among the other officers. If this raid wasn't authorized, then they were all potentially complicit in an illegal operation. The atmosphere in the room shifted as officers began to exchange worried glances. Meanwhile, outside the building, Dr. Chen had been making phone calls of her own. As a respected child psychologist, she had contacts throughout the city government, and she was using every one of them to get answers about what was happening at her sister's daycare. Councilwoman Martinez. Dr. Chen spoke into her phone. I need to know who authorized this raid. There are 23 disabled children being held hostage by police officers, and no one can give me a straight answer about why. City Councilwoman Elena Martinez was equally confused. Lisa, I haven't heard anything about a terrorist threat or any kind of police operation. Are you sure this is legitimate? That's exactly what I'm trying to find out. These children are being traumatized for no apparent reason, and every official I talk to claims they don't know anything about it. Councilwoman Martinez immediately began making her own calls, working her way up the chain of command. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Not only had no terrorist threat been reported, but the police department had no record of authorizing any kind of operation at the daycare. Back inside the building, the confrontation between HOA and Johnson was escalating. You need to end this operation right now. HOA. The captain is on his way down here, and he's bringing internal affairs with him. Internal affairs. HOA's voice was tight with panic. Why would they be involved? Because someone filed a complaint about unauthorized use of police resources. And because someone else mentioned that you've been pushing these people to hire your brother-in-law's security company. The color drained from HOA's face. Around the room, other officers were beginning to understand what was happening. They had been manipulated into participating in what was essentially a shakedown operation designed to force the daycare into hiring a specific security company. Sarah, who had been listening to the exchange with growing amazement, finally spoke up. So, there was never any terrorist threat. You terrorized these children, denied them food and medicine, and traumatized them for hours just to try to force us into hiring your brother-in-law's company. HOA's silence was answer enough. Around the room, the other officers were staring at him with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. They had signed up to protect and serve, not to participate in elaborate schemes to intimidate disabled children. Officer Johnson stepped forward, his voice filled with authority. All units, stand down. This operation is terminated immediately. He turned to Sarah. Ma'am, I'm ordering the immediate release of all children and staff. Please get them the medical attention they need. As news of the operation's termination spread through the building, the officers began to lower their weapons and step back. The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Children who had been huddled in fear began to lift their heads, sensing that the immediate danger had passed. Sarah immediately went to work. checking on each child and beginning the process of reuniting them with their families. "Tommy, sweetie, it's okay now. The scary part is over." She knelt beside the little boy in the Batman costume, who was still unresponsive. "Your mommy is outside waiting for you. She's been waiting all day." Slowly, Tommy's eyes focused on Sarah's face. "Are the bad guys gone?" he whispered. "Yes, honey, the bad guys are gone." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "And you know what? You were so brave. You were a real superhero today." Outside, the news of the operation's end spread quickly through the crowd of parents. The police barriers came down, and families rushed toward the building. Maria Rodriguez was among the first to reach the entrance, her eyes scanning desperately for her daughter Isabella. "Isabella, mommy's here," Maria called out as she spotted her daughter, still in her stained Supergirl costume, sitting quietly in her wheelchair. Isabella's face lit up at the sight of her mother, and she held out her arms for a hug. "Mommy, I was so scared. The policemen were mean to us." Isabella's voice was small and shaky. "I know, baby. I know. But you're safe now. Mommy's here. And you're safe." Maria held her daughter close, feeling the little girl's body trembling with residual fear. All around the building, similar scenes were playing out as parents reunited with their children. James Wilson found his son Kevin sitting alone in a corner, rocking back and forth while still wearing his tattered Spider-Man costume. The reunion was wordless but profound, father and son holding each other as if they never wanted to let go. As the children were reunited with their families, the full scope of what had happened began to emerge. Dr. Chen, working with other mental health professionals who had arrived on the scene, began conducting preliminary assessments of the children's psychological state. The results were devastating. Every single child shows signs of acute trauma. Dr. Chen reported to the gathering crowd of parents and media. Several are experiencing symptoms of severe anxiety, panic attacks, and regression. It's going to take months, possibly years, of therapy to help them recover from what happened here today. The media had been covering the story all day, but now the narrative was shifting from a terrorist threat to a scandal of epic proportions. Jennifer Walsh, the Channel 7 reporter, stood before the daycare building with her cameraman, delivering a live report that would shock the entire city. "Good evening. I'm Jennifer Walsh, reporting from the Sunshine Special Needs Daycare, where what initially appeared to be a response to a terrorist threat has been revealed as an elaborate scheme by a corrupt police officer to intimidate disabled children into hiring his brother-in-law's security company." As Captain Rodriguez arrived on the scene with internal affairs investigators, Officer HOA was quietly escorted away in handcuffs. The other officers, while not criminally charged, faced serious questions about their failure to question the legitimacy of the operation. "This is a dark day for our department," Captain Rodriguez stated in an impromptu press conference. "The actions of Officer HOA do not represent the values of our police force. He has been suspended pending a full investigation, and if the allegations are proven, he will face the full consequences of his actions." But the damage was already done. The children who had started the day excited about their superhero costumes were now afraid of uniforms. Parents who had trusted the daycare to provide a safe environment for their vulnerable children were questioning whether anywhere was truly safe. Over the following days, the story continued to unfold. Investigations revealed that Secure Solutions, Inc. had been using similar tactics at other facilities throughout the city, though never with such extreme methods. The company's aggressive sales practices had included veiled threats about the vulnerability of schools and daycares to terrorist attacks. They would show up with these elaborate presentations about how dangerous the world was becoming, explained Margaret Thompson, director of another local daycare. They had statistics about school shootings, terrorist attacks, all designed to make us feel like we were irresponsible if we didn't hire them. The City Council launched a formal investigation into the incident, with Councilwoman Martinez leading the charge. The hearings, held in the city's largest auditorium to accommodate the overflow crowd, revealed the full extent of the corruption. Officer HOA used his position of authority to terrify innocent children. Councilwoman Martinez declared during the opening statements, he weaponized their trust in law enforcement to serve his own financial interests. This is not just a crime against these specific children. It's a crime against the very concept of justice. Sarah Chen took the stand to describe the events of that day, her voice steady but emotional as she recounted the terror she had witnessed. These children came to us that morning excited to be superheroes. They left traumatized, afraid, and confused about why the people they're taught to trust would hurt them. Parent after parent testified about the ongoing impact on their children. Maria Rodriguez described how Isabella now had nightmares about police officers breaking into her bedroom. James Wilson explained how Kevin had regressed developmentally, losing skills he had worked years to develop. My son used to love superhero movies, James testified, his voice breaking. Now he hides whenever he sees a police officer on TV. He asks me why the superheroes didn't protect him. How do I explain that the people who were supposed to be the superheroes were actually the bad guys? The investigation revealed that Officer HOA had been planning the fake raid for weeks, carefully timing it to coincide with the daycare's Superhero Day to maximize the psychological impact. He had falsified reports about terrorist threats and had used his position to authorize the operation without proper oversight. The defendant's actions were calculated, deliberate, and designed to exploit the vulnerabilities of the most defenseless members of our community. The district attorney announced when formal charges were filed. He will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law for child endangerment, abuse of authority, and conspiracy. But legal consequences were only part of the story. The real reckoning came in the form of systemic changes designed to prevent such abuses in the future. The City Council passed emergency legislation requiring multiple levels of authorization for any police operation involving schools or daycares. No child should ever again be subjected to the terror these children experienced. Councilwoman Martinez declared, as the new laws were passed unanimously, we are creating mandatory psychological evaluations for all officers involved in operations affecting children, and we are establishing an independent oversight board to monitor police activities in educational and care facilities. The police department implemented sweeping reforms, including new training programs focused on working with special needs populations and mandatory reporting procedures for any operations involving children. Captain Rodriguez, despite not being personally involved in the corruption, stepped down to allow for new leadership. I take full responsibility for the failure of oversight that allowed this to happen, he stated in his resignation letter. These children and their families deserve leadership that will never allow such a betrayal of trust to occur again. Officer Johnson, whose decision to question the operation had ultimately exposed the corruption, was promoted to detective and tasked with leading the new Children's Protection Unit. We have a sacred duty to protect the most vulnerable members of our community, he said in his first address to the unit. What happened at that daycare will never happen again on my watch. The civil lawsuits filed by the families resulted in significant settlements that were used to fund ongoing therapy for the affected children and to establish a foundation dedicated to protecting special needs children from institutional abuse. The daycare itself received funding for enhanced security measures, legitimate ones, focused on creating a safe and welcoming environment, rather than turning the facility into a fortress. 6 months after the incident, the daycare held another superhero day. This time, the celebration was different. The children, many of whom were still in therapy, had worked with their counselors to reclaim the joy that had been stolen from them. Their costumes were brighter, their smiles more determined. Tommy, now 9 years old, stood before the group in his Batman costume, his voice strong and clear. Superheroes protect people who can't protect themselves. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure no other kids have to be scared like we were. Marcus, still in his wheelchair, but now wearing a specially designed Superman cape that accommodated his equipment, added, "Real superheroes don't need guns or scary voices. They just need to care about people." The event was attended by Detective Johnson and several other officers, all of whom had volunteered to work with the children to help rebuild trust in law enforcement. They came not in tactical gear, but in their own superhero costumes, ready to play games and share stories about the real meaning of courage. "You know what makes someone a real superhero?" Detective Johnson asked the assembled children. "It's not being strong or having special powers. It's choosing to do the right thing, even when it's hard." Emma, now able to walk short distances with her new leg braces, raised her hand. "Like when you told the truth about the bad policeman." Exactly like that. Emma, sometimes being a superhero means standing up to other adults, even when they're supposed to be on your side. The transformation wasn't just in the children, but in the entire community. The incident had sparked a broader conversation about the treatment of disabled individuals and the need for better protection against institutional abuse. Advocacy groups formed, led by the parents who had lived through the crisis, working to ensure that such exploitation could never happen again. Maria Rodriguez, who had become one of the most vocal advocates, spoke at community meetings throughout the city. "Our children may have disabilities, but they are not disabled in their ability to love, to trust, and to hope. When that trust is betrayed, it damages not just them, but all of us. We have a responsibility to protect that trust." The story of the fake terror raid became a case study in police academies and social work programs across the country. It served as a stark reminder of how power can be abused and how the most vulnerable members of society can be exploited by those who are supposed to protect them. Officer Hoa was ultimately sentenced to 5 years in prison for child endangerment, abuse of authority, and conspiracy. His brother-in-law's security company was shut down, and both men were banned from working in any capacity involving children or law enforcement. The judge's sentencing statement was unequivocal. "You took advantage of your position of trust to terrorize innocent children for financial gain. You weaponized their disabilities against them, using their vulnerabilities as a tool of intimidation. This court finds your actions to be among the most despicable abuses of authority it has ever encountered." But perhaps the most powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit came from the children themselves. During the 1-year anniversary of the incident, they organized their own memorial service, not to mourn what had been lost, but to celebrate what had been gained. We learned that real superheroes don't always wear badges. Isabella, now 7 years old, read from a statement the children had written together. Sometimes they wear nurse uniforms, or teacher clothes, or just regular parent clothes. And sometimes superheroes are kids like us, who choose to be brave even when we're scared. The daycare had been transformed into something more than just a care facility. It had become a symbol of resilience, a place where children learned that their voices mattered, that their safety was non-negotiable, and that true strength came from standing together against injustice. Sarah Chen, who had been promoted to director of the new Children's Advocacy Center, stood before the assembled crowd of children, parents, and community members. What happened here was terrible, but what we've built in response is beautiful. We've created a community where every child is valued, where every voice is heard, and where every person in authority is held accountable for their actions. The changes weren't just local. The incident had sparked national conversations about police accountability, the protection of vulnerable populations, and the need for better oversight of law enforcement activities. Legislative changes were implemented in dozens of states, all referencing the Sunshine Daycare incident as a catalyst for reform. Dr. Chen, who had become a leading expert on institutional trauma, was frequently called to testify before legislative committees. The children of Sunshine Daycare taught us that vulnerability is not weakness, and that those who prey on the vulnerable are not strong. They showed us that true courage comes from speaking truth to power, regardless of the consequences. As the second anniversary of the incident approached, the daycare prepared for another superhero day. This time, the celebration would be joined by children from dozens of other facilities across the region, all coming together to celebrate their strength and resilience. Tommy, now 11 years old and still devoted to his Batman costume, had been chosen to speak at the opening ceremony. 2 years ago, some bad people tried to make us feel small and scared. But we learned something important that day. We learned that being different doesn't make us weak. It makes us special, and special people have special powers to change the world. The crowd erupted in applause as Tommy continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. We might not be able to fly or lift cars or shoot webs, but we can do something even more powerful. We can make sure that no other kids have to go through what we went through. We can make sure that the adults who were supposed to protect us actually do their jobs. As the ceremony concluded and the children began their celebration, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground where, 2 years earlier, police vehicles had surrounded the building. Now, those same spaces were filled with laughter, joy, and the sound of children playing, children who had learned that their voices mattered, that their safety was non-negotiable, and that true superheroes come in all shapes, sizes, and abilities. The transformation was complete, but the work was far from over. The children of Sunshine Daycare had become advocates, activists, and agents of change. They had learned that sometimes the greatest superpowers are the simplest ones: the power to speak the truth, the power to stand together, and the power to refuse to let fear define their futures. In the end, the story of the fake terror raid became more than just a tale of corruption exposed. It became a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the power of community, and the unshakable truth that those who seek to exploit the vulnerable will always be overcome by those who choose to protect them. The children had indeed become superheroes, not in spite of their disabilities, but because of their determination to use their experiences to make the world safer for everyone. The legacy of that terrible day lived on, not in trauma, but in triumph, not in fear, but in hope, and not in the memory of what was lost, but in the celebration of what was gained: a community united, a system reformed, and a group of extraordinary children who had learned that the most powerful superpower of all is the courage to stand up for what is right.